The sniveling concordance of supremacy, bless their 3 hearts each, had grown very comfortable. Too comfortable, really. After thousands of years of uninterrupted self-congratulation and endless cocktail receptions on orbital palaces, they believed they had achieved pinnacle civilization. No wars that mattered to them, no rebellion they couldn't squash, and certainly no mythical human boogeyman. Oh, the humans. The apes of Terra. How the stories went. Long ago, or so the elder races claimed, a race of upstart mammals clawed their way off of blue marble and, despite their soft bodies and embarrassing lack of exoskeletons, managed to carve an empire that scarred the stars themselves. But like all campfire tales, the story ended with their inevitable fall. The humans burned too brightly, fought too hard, and, everyone assumed, destroyed themselves in some spectacular fashion that no one had bothered to document. You see, that's the funny thing about the Concordance. They are marvelous at throwing galas and signing treaties written in 17 languages on gold foil. They are abysmal at record-keeping. So, naturally, after a few thousand years of nothing but whispers, no ruins, no homeworld, no transponders, not even a smell, humanity became little more than a bedtime threat to keep Zora larvae from gnawing through airlock seals. Eat your nutrient slurry, or the apes of Terra will get you. Hilarious. And then came the Drek horde. Oh, the Drek. They were the Concordance's most recent headache. If a headache could napalm entire planets and enslave billions while cackling about it. The Drek were the galaxy's apex predators, or so everyone said. Their ships were bristling with weapons. Their warlords wore armor made of conquered worlds' crusts. They expanded like fire through dry brush. The Concordance, confident in their technobabble shields and endless committees, believed that, eventually, the Drek would calm down. They would sign a treaty and become civilized. Spoiler, the Drek never did. By the time the Battle of Xanthar Prime approached, the Drek had already eaten through 30 systems in as many months. The Concordance sat in their ivory towers drafting yet another strongly worded memorandum while the skies of Xanthara flamed under Drek bombardment. But nobody, not the Concordance, not the Drek, expected what happened next. It started as a ripple. The sky above Xanthara Prime, already glowing orange from atmospheric fires, split open. And no, not metaphorically, literally. A jagged rift tore through space itself, glowing like a wound, sparking with lightning that didn't respect physics or good manners. From the breach came ships, not sleek and delicate like the Alvari cruisers, not organic and disturbing like the Zorahai vessels. No, these ships were angry geometry, all sharp angles, hard edges, and brutal scars, painted in the muted gray of war and indifference. They weren't graceful. They weren't pretty. They looked like the kind of machines built by people who valued dead enemies over artistic expression. Their hulls bore no sigils of allegiance, no painted lines of lineage, nothing to explain who they were or where they came from. Only the battered scars of thousands of battles, some older than the Concordance itself, adorned their surfaces. They came through one after another, in perfect formation. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy saw what it looked like when discipline entered the room and everyone else realized they'd been playing checkers on a chessboard. The Concordance, watching from a safe 20 light years away, panicked immediately. Who are they? Is it a new Drek weapon? Are we being invaded by another species? The Drek, of course, laughed. To them, these relics were laughable. Some long-lost fleet that probably got bored hiding in a nebula and decided to come out to die. One particularly smug Drek warlord ordered a broadside volley from his flagship, a Colossus-class plasma destroyer aptly named Devourer of Hope. The plasma lances hit squarely on the largest human ship, a hulking mass of steel and spite at the head of the formation. Everyone watching, Concordance, Drek, even a few disinterested asteroids, expected it to vaporize. It did not. The human ship didn't even flinch. Its armor, some unholy alloy that no Concordance database could identify, absorbed the hit like a predator yawning. Then it responded. not with some graceful beam of energy or an elegant blossom of antimatter. Oh no. It responded with kinetic rounds the size of office buildings, moving so fast they burned the airless void like meteors. When they struck the Drek fleet, the result wasn't a battle. It was embarrassing. Shields meant to withstand the full fury of the Concordance collapsed like cheap umbrellas in a hurricane. Drek warships crumpled, detonated, and disintegrated one after another, their mighty hulls torn apart as if the laws of physics themselves had been weaponized. What followed could hardly be called a fight. It was a performance. The human ships advanced in tight, disciplined formations, every movement purposeful, every shot precise. There was no wasted motion, no extravagant shows of force. Only the cold, mechanical efficiency of a predator that had done this before. For hours, though it must have felt like years to the Drek, the humans moved through the once invincible armada, tearing it to pieces without a single visible sign of strain. When the last Drek flagship finally fell silent, torn open and bleeding fire into the void, the humans stopped. They didn't chase the survivors. They didn't taunt the conquered. They didn't even stick around to gloat. Instead, a single transmission was broadcast across all channels. A deep, resonant voice, so human hurt to hear, spoke just 7 words in a language thought extinct. We are human, and we have returned. On the Concordance homeworld, where entire committees of bureaucrats immediately soiled their ceremonial robes, panic reached maximum volume. Every species that had scoffed at the myths now realized the myths were real, and they were really, really pissed. Even the Drek warlords, once so loud, were reduced to silence. One of them, an officer who had witnessed the entire debacle firsthand, reportedly managed to mumble before he was vaporized. But ghosts don't shoot back. Oh, sweet summer child. On board the flagship of the human fleet, later identified by survivors as the UHS Retribution, Admiral Elias Voris stood calmly at the viewport, hands clasped behind his back as the wreckage of the Drek fleet drifted past. Beside him, Captain Rin Vasquez, who had retained just enough sense of humor to function, muttered with a faint smirk. They thought we were a myth, Admiral. Ghost stories don't usually shoot back. Voris didn't smile, didn't even flinch. He simply watched the dying light of the Drek fleet fade away and said, quietly, "They don't understand yet, but they will." And with that, the humans moved forward into the darkness of space, leaving nothing but whispers, wreckage, and a galaxy realizing, far too late, that ghosts don't just shoot back. They come to finish the story. The Battle of Xanthar Prime had ended not with a bang, but with about 1 billion of them, all delivered by the human fleet with surgical precision. In just 4 hours, the Drek Horde's vaunted armada, 1,000 warships strong, said to be unmatched, had been reduced to debris, flaming carcasses, and a few stunned survivors whimpering into open calms. One would assume the humans, having just obliterated an apex predator species and made the entire galaxy spill its collective drink, would take a victory lap. Perhaps a rousing speech? A demand for tribute? An ultimatum? Nope. What followed was far worse. They said nothing. Nothing at all. On the surface of Xanthar Prime, the fires still burned. Drek carcasses, biological and mechanical, littered the world in equal measure. The surviving population cowered in bunkers, waiting for the inevitable announcement of their new overlord's demands. They waited an hour, then a day, then 3. But the humans never spoke. Instead, their ships prowled the wreckage above, methodically sweeping up what remained of the Drek fleet. Nothing salvageable was left for the enemy. This was not some ceremonial victory. This was pest control. Back in the marble and gilt Concordance Council Hall, located on their jewel of a capital world, panic was rising to symphonic levels. High Chancellor Vexera, the negotiator, sat stiffly at the central podium, her silver eyes scanning the dozens of panicked representatives now bickering across the chamber. "This is unacceptable," screeched a Zora brood mother, mandibles clattering in a way that would have been adorable if she wasn't talking about annihilation. "They won't even answer our hails. Perhaps they don't have translation equipment. offered a flustered Ilari envoy, already sweating blue under the harsh lights. "Oh, please," hissed a Zareth general, claws flexing on the table. "They reduced the Drek to ashen hours. You really think they forgot to pack a dictionary?" At that, Vexera finally spoke, her voice calm but brittle. "We attempted contact 12 times. Different languages, different formats. Nothing. Not even a rejection. Just silence. That silence, of course, was deafening. Worse than threats. Worse than demands. Because predators didn't explain themselves to prey. Meanwhile, aboard the UHS Retribution, Admiral Elias Voris was busy. Specifically, busy not caring about the Concordance's increasingly desperate transmissions. On the bridge, he stood before a massive holomap depicting the battlefield, hands clasped behind his back, his expression neutral as always. His fleet was already sweeping outward, mopping up Drek remnants that had escaped the initial slaughter. "Admiral," Captain Ren Vasquez murmured, handing him a datapad, casualty report. Voris took it, glanced briefly, and exhaled through his nose. "Drek forces eliminated. 98%, Vasquez read aloud. "Human casualties, 0.4%. Voris grunted. "Too easy," he muttered. Vasquez smirked faintly. "They thought we were a myth, sir. Ghost stories don't usually shoot back." But Voris did not return the smile. "They don't understand yet," he replied, voice low. "But they will." On the council capital, Vexera was still trying to herd the political cats that passed for the galaxy's leadership. Representatives argued, cried, shouted. The Zari broodlord rasped. "We should send an envoy directly to their flagship." "We attempted that," Vexera snapped. "They ignored us. Perhaps they're waiting for the right offering?" suggested an Alvari noble, already looking nauseous at the thought of paying tribute. But Vexera only shook her head. "That silence," she said grimly, "is worse than any declaration of war. That silence is the sound of predators deciding whether we're worth the effort." Meanwhile, back aboard the Retribution, the humans were listening to the Council's transmissions. Of course they were. They intercepted every signal, every plea, every whimper of desperation. They just didn't care enough to answer. The ship's AI, affectionately called Omen because humans have a flair for drama, projected snippets of intercepted messages on the bridge. High Chancellor Vexera requests emergency audience, offering reparations for perceived wrongs. Begged for dialogue before further bloodshed. Voris glanced at them, unreadable as ever. Then he simply said, "Let them stew." Vasquez, who had seen enough galactic politics to appreciate this level of calculated cruelty, chuckled darkly. "They're afraid," he noted. Voris finally let the faintest hint of a smile curl at the edge of his mouth. "Good," he said. "Let them be afraid. Let them remember what the Concordance failed to understand, and what was rapidly dawning on every corner of the galaxy, was that humans weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here for reparations or even revenge. They were here because it was theirs, and that made them a problem nobody knew how to solve." In the days following Xanthra Prime, human fleets continued to expand outward, silently, efficiently, into Drek-controlled systems. At every battle, the story repeated. Humans arrived. Humans obliterated resistance. Humans cleaned up. Humans moved on. At no point did they demand territory. At no point did they boast. At no point did they explain themselves. They simply acted like a force of nature. On the Concordance capital, the Council called another emergency session. This time, everyone showed up, even the Zora swarm, who usually couldn't be bothered unless there was blood involved. The latest report, displayed as a massive hologram in the chamber, showed an entire sector blinking red as human fleets swept through it, leaving no Drek survivors. "This is a crisis unlike any other," Vexera admitted, her voice calm but low. "The humans are no longer myth. They are real, and they are advancing." "Have they made any attempt to communicate?" asked a Zareth general, clicking his claws nervously. A long silence followed before Kale Theres, a deep blue Ilari envoy, shook his head. "Nothing. They don't negotiate. They don't respond. They only act." The Zora broodmother, ever the optimist, chittered sharply. Then they're no different from the Drek. We should unite and exterminate them before they become unstoppable. At that, Vexera finally turned her gaze on the brood mother, her expression icier than the void. You misunderstand, she said flatly. They are not a mindless swarm. They are not driven by greed or instinct. They are something else entirely. That realization, though unspoken, began to spread throughout the chamber like a contagion. This wasn't a conqueror you could bargain with. This wasn't a warlord you could appease. This wasn't a swarm you could burn out. This was an empire, one that didn't ask for permission. On the bridge of the Retribution, Vorus stood watching the void beyond the viewport. His officers worked quietly around him, running the fleet with flawless precision. The galaxy, he reflected, was watching. Good. Let them watch. Let them tremble. Because the silence of humanity wasn't a lack of words. It was a message. It was humanity letting the galaxy stew in its own guilt, its own fear, reminding everyone that ghosts don't talk. Ghosts act, and when they do, they rewrite the story. The galaxy finally understood something essential. The humans weren't responding because they didn't need to. Predators don't explain themselves to prey. And ghosts don't scream. They whisper. They hunt. And then they make sure you never forget them again. By now, the galaxy had stopped laughing. The sniveling concordance of supremacy, once smug rulers of all they surveyed, were collectively chewing their claws, mandibles, and whatever other appendages they used to emote. Because the humans, those ancient, angry ghosts, weren't stopping. Oh no, they were advancing. World by world, system by system. Everywhere they went, the pattern was the same. Human ships appeared out of nowhere. Resistance was incinerated with surgical precision. The survivors were left to wonder whether surrender was mandatory or merely inevitable. It was terrifying, really. The galaxy had grown accustomed to conquerors who shouted threats, demanded tribute, and gorged themselves on plunder. The humans did none of that. They simply took, and they didn't even bother explaining themselves. That silence, of course, drove the Concordance's leadership into a frenzy. Another emergency session was called in the Grand Hall of Diplomacy, which, in fairness, was more accustomed to hosting galas than galactic-scale panic attacks. Every seat was filled. Even the Zora Swarm, who normally considered diplomacy a waste of perfectly good chitin, had sent a full delegation. Above them, a massive holographic display mapped the galaxy in grim detail. Red dots spread across Drek space, each one marking another system lost to humanity's relentless advance. It was a galaxy-sized game of connect the dots, and it spelled checkmate. This is unprecedented, screeched the Zorib brood mother, her mandibles clattering so fast it sounded like applause. We must unite and destroy them before they... Before they what? Interrupted Vexera, High Chancellor of the Concordance and owner of the only remaining functional spine in the room. The brood mother froze. Before they become unstoppable. Vexera's silver eyes narrowed. They already are. You see, Vexera understood something the others didn't. She'd seen the intercepted footage. The humans didn't slaughter civilians. They didn't loot worlds. In fact, and this was perhaps the most horrifying detail of all, they rebuilt. On Drek worlds now under human control, factories roared back to life. Orbital defenses were reconstructed. Civilians, Drek civilians, mind you, were left unharmed. It wasn't conquest. It was administration. And that terrified the Concordance more than any fleet ever could. Because only an empire planning to stay bothered rebuilding. At last, Vexera made a decision. We're done sending messages they won't answer, she announced to the assembled delegates. There was a collective gasp, as if she'd just proposed licking the surface of a star. You can't mean to, stammered an Alvari noble. I do, she cut in. I'm going to them. In person. Silence fell like a guillotine. You would board one of their ships? Hissed the brood mother. Yes. They'll kill you, someone muttered. Maybe, she replied, rising to her full height. But at least then we'll know what they want. And so it was that the High Chancellor of the Concordance, in her finest diplomatic robes and with her second-in-command Rilan at her side, boarded the most elegant envoy vessel the galaxy had ever seen. sleek, polished, bristling with ceremonial insignia. It looked like a floating wedding cake. It exited hyperspace into the human fleet's staging area and was immediately dwarfed by the hulking human ship surrounding it. Brutal, blocky, and scarred, the human fleet made the envoy ship look like a toy. Still, to the humans' credit, they didn't shoot it out of the sky. A single transmission crackled through. Docking sequence authorized. You may proceed. The voice was low, cold, measured, not welcoming, not hostile, just inevitable. Inside the airlock of the UHS Retribution, Vexra and Relan waited as the hatch opened. A hiss of depressurization. Then they saw them. Humans. A squad of soldiers in black and gray armor. Helmets on, weapons at their sides, moving with the kind of discipline that made even the Zor swarm look sloppy. At their center stood a man. Tall, hard, dressed in a simple uniform that bore no medals, no ribbons, no ostentation. Just a single insignia of the United Human Systems. Admiral Elias Voris. His presence was like gravity, silent but undeniable. His eyes, cold and blue, locked on Vexra's as if he was already calculating her worth. You asked for a meeting, he said flatly. Here we are. Vexra's throat tightened. I am High Chancellor Vexra of the... I know who you are, Voris interrupted. What followed was not so much a conversation as a dissection. Vexra attempted diplomacy, flattery, even veiled threats. None of it worked. Voris answered only what he deemed worth answering. When she accused him of wiping out the Drek, he replied, they were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. When she asked if the humans intended to attack the Concordance, he countered with, that depends on whether you make the same mistakes they did. And when she finally demanded to know what the humans wanted, he stopped, turned, and replied simply, justice. By the time Vexra was led into the Retribution's tactical chamber, she felt the full weight of what she was dealing with. This was not an empire fueled by greed or glory. This was not even an empire fueled by vengeance, though there was plenty of that too. This was an empire fueled by memory. The humans hadn't forgotten the betrayals of the past. They'd been waiting in the shadows, sharpening their knives, rebuilding their fleets, preparing. And now, they were ready to reclaim everything that had been stolen. What happens after the Drek are gone? She asked finally, almost afraid to hear the answer. Voris's lips curled, not quite a smile, but enough to chill the blood. That depends, he said, his voice as steady as stone, on whether you want to survive the new order or become part of the ruins we leave behind. When Vexra returned to her vessel, her crew looked at her expectantly. Well? Rilan asked softly. Vexra stared at him, her voice hoarse but firm. They're not here to negotiate, she said. They're here to build, and nothing in this galaxy is going to stop them. Back on the bridge of the Retribution, Voris watched the envoy ship depart. Captain Vasquez raised an eyebrow. How'd she take it? Exactly as expected, Voris replied. Then he turned back to the holomap, where human fleets were already moving toward their next targets. They'll scramble now, Vasquez mused. Form alliances. Prepare defenses. They'll panic, Voris agreed. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, but it won't matter. We're not here for permission. For the first time, the galaxy stood face to face with its ghosts. And it realized, far too late, that ghosts don't just haunt. They knock on the door, step inside, and ask if you'd like to kneel now or later. The galaxy had two choices. Kneel now or kneel later. By the time High Chancellor Vexra returned from her voluntarily humiliating audience with Admiral Voris, the truth was obvious to anyone who could read a star chart. The sniveling concordance of supremacy, that once proud collection of bureaucrats, warlords, and aristocrats, was finished. Their fleets were shattered. Their authority was a joke. Their treaties might as well have been written on napkins. And yet, humanity still hadn't stopped. No grand pronouncements, no ultimate demands, no ultimatums, no screeds, no gloating victory parades. They simply kept going. The former Drek homeworld of Carvo, 6 lay in ruins. The once mighty Drek warlords who, just a month ago, were stomping across the galaxy and roasting entire populations alive for fun, were now extinct. Yes, extinct. Not in the figurative sense. In the literal, capital E, file under historical footnote sense. By the time the UHS fleets moved on from Carvo 6, there wasn't a single Drek officer left breathing. And yet, and this is the part that kept the Concordance up at night, the civilians? The civilians were fine. In fact, they were better than fine. On Drek worlds now under human control, orbital factories hummed with life. Hospitals reopened. Schools, yes, even for Drek spawnlings, resumed classes. Food shipments arrived on time, without the usual bribes, shortages, or ceremonial weeping. It was horrifying, because the humans weren't behaving like conquerors. They weren't enslaving the locals, torching infrastructure, or stealing resources. They were managing everything, efficiently, quietly, like they'd been doing it forever. The galaxy watched in stunned disbelief as human warships advanced deeper into Concordance space. At each world, the same pattern emerged. Human ships appear. Local defense forces panic, fire a few hopeless volleys, get vaporized. Humans land, take control, and start handing out supplies? Yes. Instead of looting, they delivered food. Instead of enslaving populations, they restored order. Instead of stripping planets bare, they rebuilt them. One by one, entire systems began surrendering voluntarily. Why fight when you could just surrender? It wasn't even surrender in the traditional sense. You kept your culture. You kept your leaders as figureheads. You even got a shiny new flag. You just had to accept one uncomfortable reality. You work for the humans now. And frankly, it was better than what the Concordance ever offered. In the Concordance capital, chaos reigned supreme. The Grand Hall was packed with squabbling representatives, all shouting over one another about whether they should fight, flee, or grovel more convincingly. Vexera, who had long since given up pretending to care about their dignity, stood at the podium and delivered the bad news. "They're not here to conquer us," she announced, her voice cutting through the din. "They're here to replace us." A stunned silence followed. Then, from the back, "They're converting us?" "Yes," Vexera replied, with all the enthusiasm of a woman who just realized her species' resume was irrelevant. "They're building something bigger, and they don't need our permission." Meanwhile, aboard the UHS Retribution, Admiral Voris and his officers watched as yet another Concordance world lowered its defenses without a shot fired. The planetary governor appeared on the view screen, pale and shaking. "We surrender. Our people do not wish to resist you." Voris studied him for a long, uncomfortable moment, then nodded. "Then you won't have to." Within hours, human transports landed on the surface, not with weapons drawn, but with engineers, medical teams, and administrators. Roads were repaired. Defenses were rebuilt. Order was restored. It was almost insulting how fast it all happened. Captain Vasquez, watching the landing operations unfold, shook her head with a faint smirk. "They're surrendering faster than expected," she noted. Voris didn't even look away from the viewport. "They were never loyal to the Concordance," he replied coolly. Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "And now they're loyal to us?" Voris actually allowed the faintest hint of smile. "No," he said. "They trust us." And that, more than anything, terrified the Concordance. Because here's the thing the galaxy never understood about humans. They didn't need to terrify you into compliance. They just needed to prove they could protect you better than anyone else ever had. And then, you came to them. Across Concordance space, the pattern repeated again and again. Worlds that once flew the banners of ancient empires now raised the standard of the United Human Systems. Not because they were forced, but because they wanted to. After all, who wouldn't? The humans arrived, ended centuries of chaos, and rebuilt everything you'd lost. And they did it without asking for bribes or groveling speeches. Why cling to a failing empire when you could be part of something that actually worked? Back in the Concordance chamber, Vexera listened to the bickering intensify. "This is worse than an invasion," Zari General hissed, pacing. "They're not conquering worlds, they're converting them." Vexera's hands clenched behind her back as she watched the reports scroll across the holo display. 5 more independent systems had surrendered overnight. No battle, No bloodshed, just quiet, orderly assimilation. They're building something, she murmured to no one in particular. And she was right. In the streets of newly acquired worlds, children of every species played under banners they'd never seen before. Markets reopened. Crime rates dropped. Supplies flowed where they were needed. The humans weren't just erasing the Concordance's authority, they were replacing it with something better. Aboard the Retribution, Vorus stood at the viewport, hands behind his back, as always, watching another fleet move into position over a surrendered world. On the screen, the planetary governor, another nervous bundle of scales and silk, appeared, voice trembling. "We wish to join the United Human Systems. Please, protect us." Vorus inclined his head. "You will be protected." Then the feed cut, and human shuttles descended like steel rain, carrying not soldiers but builders. Captain Vasquez chuckled softly, leaning on the console. "They're surrendering faster than we can process them," she noted. Vorus allowed himself the faintest sigh. "They were never loyal to the Concordance," he said. "They feared it. That's not the same thing. And now they fear us." Vorus shook his head slowly. "No," he corrected. "Now they believe in us." On the council capitol, Vexera stood silently at the center of the chamber as yet another heated debate erupted around her. One representative pounded the table in frustration. "Do you not see what's happening? They're replacing us." Vexera's silver eyes lifted to meet his. "No," she corrected coldly. "They already have." The galaxy learned an uncomfortable truth that day. You don't need to burn everything to rule everything. Sometimes all it takes is competence. And humans, it turned out, were obscenely competent. They didn't just conquer your worlds. They made them work. And worst of all, they offered you a desk and a pension in the empire that used to terrify you. Welcome to the United Human Systems. Now hiring. By now, the galaxy was done pretending. The sniveling concordance of supremacy, that ancient bureaucracy of self-congratulating, pompous mediocrities, had stopped pretending it could stop humanity. It had stopped pretending it understood humanity. It had even stopped pretending that anything resembling the old order still existed. Because it didn't. What remained were the ruins of an empire, and the humans standing atop them, planting flags with a quiet efficiency that bordered on insulting. In the days following High Chancellor Vexera's fateful return to the Concordance capital, the council chambers degenerated into chaos. Empires that had ruled the stars for millennia were now falling over themselves, trying to decide how best to grovel for mercy. Some advocated total resistance, and promptly watched their fleets incinerated like so much garbage. Some advocated hiding in distant nebulae, only to discover that humanity already owned those nebulae. Others simply curled into fetal positions and waited for it all to be over. But one thing was obvious to everyone. The war was already lost, because the humans weren't fighting a war. They were cleaning up. On Carvo 6, once the proud homeworld of the Drek, now little more than a cautionary tale, the last of the Drek resistance was vaporized, their final transmissions nothing but panicked static. From orbit, the UHS fleet observed the smoldering remains with clinical detachment. Admiral Elias Vorus stood at the viewport, hands clasped behind his back as always, watching the final plumes of fire fade into black. Captain Vasquez, leaning on the console beside him, exhaled slowly. "That's it, sir. The Drek are finished. Their fleets, their warlords, all gone." Vorus didn't even blink. "They were finished the moment they fired on us," he said calmly. Vasquez raised an eyebrow. "And the Concordance?" She pressed. Vorus's lips curled, not quite a smile. "They're next," he said simply. The Concordance, meanwhile, was coming to terms with its irrelevance at breakneck speed. Every hour brought fresh reports of entire systems choosing to join the United Human Systems. Not conquered, not enslaved, just switching sides, like loyal employees updating their resumes and walking out the door without so much as a goodbye. In the Concordance chamber, the air was thick with desperation. They're absorbing systems faster than we can even react. Hissed a Zora general, his chitin plates audibly rattling. They've already taken 5 more colonies without a shot fired. cried an Alari diplomat. They're not invading, Vexera corrected icily from the podium. They're recruiting. It was true. On world after world, the humans landed not with troops and tanks, but with engineers, medics, and construction drones. They brought food. They repaired infrastructure. They eliminated crime and corruption overnight, and then simply handed the planets back to their stunned inhabitants under the banner of the United Human Systems. And the civilians? Oh, the civilians loved it. Why wouldn't they? After centuries of being ignored, exploited, and ground under the heel of the Concordance, they were finally being treated like people. Aboard the UHS Retribution, Vasquez watched yet another planetary governor appear on the hollow screen, wide-eyed and trembling, but eager to please. We surrender. Please protect us. Vorus's response was as measured and merciless as ever. You will be protected. And just like that, another system fell into line. What the galaxy never understood, and what the Concordance never admitted, was that humans didn't just conquer territory. They conquer minds. They didn't rule by fear. They ruled by competence. And in a galaxy that had grown fat, lazy, and complacent, competence was more terrifying than any weapon. By now, the old order was disintegrating completely. Half of the council was already in hiding. The other half was busy trying to figure out how to look humble enough to avoid being stepped on. Even the Zora Swarm, who'd once vowed they would burn the humans alive, quietly dismantled their war fleets and began sending over tribute ships full of resources, hoping the humans wouldn't notice how loud their earlier threats had been. They noticed, of course. They just didn't care. On the Concordance capital, Vexera addressed the remnants of the council one final time. We have two choices, she said coolly, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. We can fight and be destroyed, or we can kneel and survive. A Zareth general growled bitterly. And you're suggesting we... What? Thank them for destroying everything we built? Vexera's silver eyes flashed. They didn't destroy it, she shot back. They replaced it, and they're doing it better than we ever could. Far above them, on the bridge of the Retribution, Vorus stood alone, watching the galaxy unfold before him. His fleets stretched across star systems, unstoppable, inexorable, inevitable. Vasquez approached quietly. How's the council taking it? She asked wryly. Vorus allowed himself a faint smirk. Exactly as expected. On world after world, the same scene played out. Human shuttles descended through burned skies. Local leaders knelt, some in fear, others in relief. And always, Vorus's voice would echo over comms, calm and cold. We're not here to destroy you. We're here to fix what you broke. And fix it they did. Factories roared back to life. Trade routes reopened. Pirates vanished overnight. Order was restored. Not because humanity demanded loyalty, but because they delivered results. One by one, the galaxy realized the truth. Humanity wasn't the monster under the bed. They were the adults in the room. In the Concordance chamber, Vexera finally delivered the last bitter pill. We must open real negotiations with humanity, she declared. Not as equals, not as rulers, but as survivors begging for a place in their new order. The room erupted in protests. But deep down, they all knew it was already over. Humanity had already won. On the bridge of the Retribution, Vorus stood before the holomap, hands clasped behind his back as always. The Concordance was finished. Their fleets, ashes. Their authority, irrelevant. Their galaxy, human. Vasquez, watching the map light up in streaks of red and blue, shook her head in disbelief. They're panicking, she murmured. They think if they scramble fast enough, they can stop us. Vorus didn't look away from the map. They're wrong, he said simply. Thus into Part 5. The galaxy learned, far too late, that humanity wasn't just back. They weren't asking. They weren't negotiating. They weren't even angry anymore. They were just done waiting. And now they were here to fix everything, whether the galaxy liked it or not. In the end, humanity didn't just reclaim their place. They took the galaxy by the collar, dusted it off, and muttered, "You're welcome." And somewhere, deep in the void, the stars themselves seemed to shiver, as if they finally understood what the rest of the galaxy had just learned. Ghost stories aren't real until they show up at your door, rebuild your house, and leave you holding the bill.